Albert adjusted his tie in the mirror, the knot feeling tighter than usual. It was Sally's birthday, and he should have been excited, but something wasn't right. The past few months had been tense. Sharon, his wife, seemed distant, her phone always face down, and her laughter no longer reaching her eyes. Albert couldn't shake the feeling that Sharon's illness was just another lie. Albert stepped into the bedroom, finding Sharon buried under blankets. She looked up, her face pale and her voice weak, but something about her appearance felt off. Albert noticed her phone buzzing quietly on the nightstand, a message from Blake flashing briefly before it disappeared. "Hey, you sure you can't come? Sally really wants you there," Albert said, trying to sound concerned, but unable to hide the edge in his voice. "We can cancel if you're not feeling well." Sharon glanced up, managing a strained smile. She coughed softly, patting her chest. "I'm really sorry, but I can barely move. You know I wouldn't miss it unless I was dying." Albert nodded slowly, studying her. The guilt flickered in her eyes, a momentary lapse before she looked away. He knew that looked too well. "All right, get some rest. I'll take care of everything," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. She flinched slightly, making him pull back with a frown. As Albert walked out, he paused in the hallway, pulling out his phone. He opened an app linked to a hidden camera he'd installed in their bedroom a few days ago. He hadn't wanted to spy on his wife, but his gut told him something was wrong. Today, he was finally going to get answers. Sharon waited until she heard the front door close and the car engine start. She jumped out of bed, her illness gone as quickly as it had appeared. She hurried to her phone, checking Blake's message. "I'm on my way. Can't wait to see you." She grinned, quickly responding. "Doors unlocked. Don't keep me waiting." Sharon paced around the room, fixing her hair in the mirror. She looked at the bed she shared with Albert, the same bed where she was about to betray him again. She hesitated for a second, feeling a pang of guilt, but the thrill of the affair overwhelmed it. She'd grown bored of the routine with Albert. Blake was her escape, her secret. At the hotel, Albert stood with Sally, helping her adjust her princess tiara. Amber, Sharon's best friend, was busy setting up the decorations, her laughter filling the room. Albert forced a smile as Sally ran off to greet her friends, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He discreetly pulled out his phone, opening the camera app again. The live feed from the bedroom showed Sharon getting dressed, her mood completely different from the sickly facade she'd shown him earlier. Amber noticed Albert's distant expression and approached him. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, touching his arm lightly. Albert shoved his phone into his pocket and forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking, Sharon's missing this, and it's bothering me more than it should." Amber nodded, her eyes softening. "She's been off lately. I tried talking to her, but she just brushes it off. Maybe it's just a rough patch." Albert nodded, not wanting to drag Amber into his suspicions. "Yeah, maybe," he said, but he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Sharon paced the living room, checking her phone every few seconds. Albert had left for Sally's birthday party, and she was finally alone. She could barely contain her excitement as she waited for Blake to arrive. Her heart pounded as she glanced at the time. Everything felt risky, but that was part of the thrill. She couldn't wait any longer. She heard the faint rumble of Blake's car pulling up. Sharon rushed to the door, peeking out the window before unlocking it. Blake slipped inside, flashing a wide grin as he pulled Sharon into a quick kiss. "Miss me?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. He smelled like cologne and a hint of smoke, his jacket still cold from the outside air. Sharon smiled, closing the door behind them. "More than you know," she said, leading him toward the bedroom. She felt a rush of adrenaline, her mind blocking out everything else. They stumbled into the room, the bed still neatly made as if it were a mockery of what was about to happen. Blake tossed his jacket on the chair, unbuttoning his shirt with an easy, practiced movement. Sharon watched him, forgetting for a moment that this was her husband's space. Albert's clothes hung neatly in the closet. Their family photos sat on the dresser, but she didn't care. Blake pulled her close, and they fell onto the bed. As they moved together, lost in their own world, the hidden camera blinked silently from its corner, capturing every second of their affair. In the middle of their tangled sheets, Blake leaned back, smirking, Your husband's a clueless idiot. Can't believe he bought the sick act, he said, running his fingers through his messy hair. Sharon laughed, resting her head on his chest. That loser is too busy with work to notice anything. And when he does, I just play the good wife. It's almost too easy, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Besides, this is so much more fun. Blake chuckled, reaching for his phone. He snapped a quick picture of them together, holding Sharon close. We should send him a postcard. Greetings from your bedroom. Sharon shoved him playfully. You're such an ass, she said, but she couldn't stop smiling. Being with Blake was the escape she needed from her everyday life. They spent the next few minutes talking, mocking Albert, and exchanging inside jokes about their affair. Sharon felt alive, free from her responsibilities, and blinded by the thrill of their deceit. Meanwhile, the camera continued recording, transmitting the video straight to Albert's phone at the hotel. He stood in the corner of the party, glancing occasionally at the screen, his expression turning colder with each passing second. He watched as Blake sprawled across his bed, mocking him, completely unaware of the camera's presence. Albert's hand tightened around his phone, anger bubbling under his calm exterior. But he stayed composed, focusing on the guests around him. Amber approached Albert again, noticing his tense expression. You seem miles away. What's going on? She asked, handing him a drink. Albert hesitated, glancing at the footage again. He hadn't shared his suspicions with anyone, not even Amber. Just dealing with something. Nothing for you to worry about, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amber studied him, concerned. If you need to talk, I'm here. I know something's up with Sharon, but I didn't want to pry. Albert nodded, appreciating Amber's support, but unwilling to let her into the mess just yet. I'll handle it, he said simply, his mind already on what was happening back at the house. Back at the bedroom, Blake rolled over, reaching for a cigarette. He lit it, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. I don't get why you're still with him. You could do better. Sharon sighed, stretching out beside him. I know, but he's stable, you know? And then there's Sally. I'm not ready to break everything apart. Blake shrugged, indifferent. Yeah, but you're here with me, so what does that say? He flicked ash onto the floor, clearly not caring about the mess he was making. Sharon watched the smoke curl into the air, her thoughts momentarily clouded by guilt. She quickly brushed it off. I'm tired of pretending. Every time he looks at me, it's like he doesn't even see me. But you, she trailed off, running her fingers down Blake's arm. You make me feel alive. Blake grinned, pulling her back into his arms. You just like the danger. Admit it, he teased, kissing her neck. Sharon laughed, feeling a thrill she hadn't felt in years. Maybe I do, she whispered, surrendering to the moment. They continued to talk, their conversation drifting between shared fantasies and petty complaints about their lives. The affair was no longer just about desire. It was about escape, rebellion, and a need for something new. As they lay tangled in each other's arms, Sharon's phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. She reached for it, her smile fading as she saw Albert's name. She hesitated, then ignored the call, turning her attention back to Blake. Everything okay? Blake asked, noticing her brief shift in mood. Sharon nodded, though her mind lingered on the unanswered call. Yeah, it's just Albert. Probably checking in on me, she said, her tone dismissive. Blake smirked, pulling her closer. You're here with me. That's all that matters. They continued to enjoy each other's company, wrapped in a web of lies that grew tighter with every passing moment. Neither of them knew how close they were to being exposed, nor did they care. Their focus was entirely on the present, blind to the consequences of their actions. I should go before your husband decides to check on you himself, he joked. Sharon laughed. He's too busy playing the doting dad. Trust me, we've got all the time in the world. They shared kisses, lingering as if to savor the risk they were taking. Little did she know, every second is capturing, every lie recording. The deception was unfolding, and Sharon was running out of time. The hotel ballroom buzzed with laughter and excitement. Kids ran around, shouting and chasing balloons while adults mingled, sipping drinks and catching up. The room was decorated in pink and gold, filled with streamers, balloons, and a giant cake topped with a crown, perfect for Sally's princess-themed birthday party. Albert stood in the corner, surrounded by his family, but his mind was elsewhere. Amber was busy organizing games with the kids, her cheerful voice cutting through the noise. Albert forced a smile as she waved to him, but he couldn't relax. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a silent reminder of what he had seen earlier. He glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then slipped away toward the empty hallway. Albert pulled out his phone and opened the app linked to the hidden camera. The screen flickered, and his breath caught in his throat as the live feed appeared. Sharon and Blake were tangled together on his bed, laughing and kissing, completely oblivious. Albert's hands tightened around the phone, his knuckles white with rage. He watched as Blake leaned back, smoking casually, the room filled with their smug laughter. Sharon looked so carefree, so different from the woman he thought he knew. Albert's chest tightened. He had suspected something was wrong for months, but seeing it unfold in real time was a punch to the gut. He couldn't tear his eyes away, anger boiling inside him with every second. Back in the ballroom, the music played on. Sally was cutting her cake, surrounded by her friends, and everyone cheered as she blew out the candles. Albert watched from the hallway, but he couldn't focus. He stared at the screen, Sharon's betrayal playing out like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He took a deep breath, his heart racing. He pulled up his camera, snapped a picture of the party crowd, and quickly typed out a message. His fingers moved fast, fueled by anger and adrenaline. Albert hit send, and the message shot through to Sharon. "We all are watching your stretching skills right now. You deserve each other. Enjoy. But guess what? You're now a homeless bitch. You have 3 minutes to pack your stuff and get the fuck out. I'm going to marry your best friend." He stared at the screen, imagining Sharon's reaction when she read those words. He hoped it would hit her as hard as her betrayal had hit him. Sharon was still lying in bed when her phone buzzed. She lazily reached for it, but when she saw Albert's name, she felt a chill run through her. She opened the text, and her heart dropped. Her eyes widened as she read the words, and then she saw the picture of Albert, smiling with Sally and all their friends and family. The truth hit her like a truck. Sharon bolted upright, shoving Blake off her. "Oh my God! Oh my God, he knows!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "He's been watching us this whole time." Blake sat up, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Calm down." Sharon shoved the phone in his face. Blake's smirk disappeared as he read the message. "Shit," he muttered, scrambling to get dressed. "We gotta get out of here. Now!" Sharon jumped out of bed, frantically grabbing her clothes. Her mind was racing. "He's coming here. Oh God, he's coming." She glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "He's bringing everyone. We're screwed." Blake grabbed his jacket, stumbling as he tried to pull on his shoes. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he mumbled, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "Just pack your stuff and leave." "He's not going to do anything." Sharon cut him off, panic clear in her voice. "You don't know Albert like I do. If he's saying this, he means it. I have to get out of here before he shows up." She grabbed a duffel bag and started stuffing it with clothes, her hands shaking. She could barely think straight, the weight of her mistake crashing down on her. At the hotel, Albert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, seeing Sharon's frantic attempts to call him, but he ignored every ring. Amber walked over, noticing Albert's tense expression. "Hey, you all right?" she asked, touching his arm gently. "You've been gone for a while." Albert forced a tight smile, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Just dealing with something," he said, his voice strained. "I'll be fine." Amber looked at him, concerned, but didn't push. "Sally's looking for you. She wants to open her present soon." Albert nodded. "I'll be right there," he said, his mind still on Sharon. He watched Amber walk away, her kindness making his next move feel justified. He knew it was wrong, but after everything Sharon had done, he felt like he had no choice. Back at the house, Sharon was still scrambling to pack. She glanced at the clock, realizing her time was running out. She shoved everything in her bag, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Blake, already dressed, paced near the door, looking like he was ready to bolt at any moment. "What are you going to do?" Blake asked, his voice barely hiding his fear. "You can't stay here." Sharon shook her head, grabbing her keys. "I don't know. I just need to get away. He's going to ruin me, Blake." She was on the verge of tears, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. This is all my fault. Albert's car screeched to a halt in front of the house. He flung the door open, his face twisted with anger. Behind him, Amber and the rest of their family and friends stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was about to unfold. Sally clung to Amber's side, confused by the sudden rush home from her birthday party. Albert marched up the driveway, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Each step felt like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. He reached the door, pausing for a moment, listening to the frantic sounds of Sharon and Blake inside. Albert's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles turning white. This was it. Albert pushed the door open with a hard shove, the sound echoing through the house. Sharon turned, eyes wide with terror. Blake, half-dressed and scrambling to find his shoes, froze in place like a deer caught in headlights. For a split second, the room was filled with the stunned silence of shattered illusions. Albert's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he roared, his words dripping with contempt. "In our own bed, Sharon? In our home?" His voice shook the walls, and everyone behind him stood still, absorbing the shock of his rage. Sharon backed away, her hands trembling. "Albert, please," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "I can explain," but Albert was in no mood to listen. "Explain it to the streets," he shouted, pointing toward the door. "Because that's where you're going. I'm done. We're done." Blake, seizing the opportunity, made a break for the door. He stumbled over his half-buttoned shirt, nearly tripping on the rug as he bolted past Albert. The family watched, stunned, as Blake scrambled out the door, running barefoot down the street. His desperate flight was a humiliating spectacle, and no one moved to stop him. Amber covered Sally's eyes, shielding her from the chaos, but Sally still peeked through her fingers, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing the hurt in her father's voice. Sharon fell to her knees, her sobs growing louder as the weight of her actions pressed down on her. "Albert, please," she begged, clutching at the hem of his shirt. "I was stupid. I made a mistake." Albert stepped back, refusing to let her touch him. His expression was cold, unyielding. "A mistake? This isn't some one-time slip-up, Sharon. You've been lying to me, to our daughter, to everyone. You did this, not me." Sharon tried to crawl closer, her voice desperate and broken. "I'll do anything, please, just don't do this." Think of Sally, but Albert wasn't swayed. He glanced at his daughter, her innocent eyes filled with confusion and fear, and it only hardened his resolve. "You don't get to use her as an excuse," he said, his voice quieter now, but still filled with fury. "You didn't think of Sally when you were with him, did you?" The room was silent, save for Sharon's quiet sobs. The weight of her betrayal hung in the air, suffocating and undeniable. Amber stepped forward, trying to defuse the tension, but Albert held up a hand, stopping her. "Amber, take Sally back to the car," Albert said, his tone softening slightly as he looked at his daughter. "She doesn't need to see this." Amber nodded, guiding Sally gently out of the house. Sally looked back at her parents, her eyes filled with unspoken questions, but Amber quickly ushered her away, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Albert turned back to Sharon, who was still on the floor, her face red and swollen from crying. "You made your choice," he said, his voice now calm but icy. "Now you live with it." Sharon clung to his leg, desperate to find any scrap of forgiveness. "We can fix this," she pleaded. "I love you, Albert. I love our family. Don't throw it all away." Albert shook his head, pulling away from her grasp. "You threw it away," he said firmly. "You and your lover. You made a fool of me, of us, and I'm done pretending like this can be fixed. You're not the woman I married. You're just someone I used to know." Sharon's shoulders slumped, her last shred of hope crumbling. She looked around the room, seeing the pity and disappointment in the eyes of her friends and family. This was her reckoning, and she was utterly alone. Albert glanced at the house, his eyes lingering on the pictures and memories they had built together. But now, all he saw were the lies that had tainted every moment. "Pack your shit and go," he said, his final words a quiet command. "You're not welcome here anymore." Sharon nodded numbly, getting to her feet. She stumbled toward the bedroom, the same room where her betrayal had been caught on camera, and began to pack her things. Every item she touched felt like a painful reminder of what she had lost. As she stuffed clothes into her bag, the reality of her actions settled in. She had destroyed her family, and there was no going back. Albert watched her pack, arms crossed and face unreadable. There was no satisfaction in this, no victory. Just the cold, bitter end of a marriage that had once meant everything. He turned and walked out of the house, not bothering to look back. Outside, the party guests were still reeling from the spectacle they had witnessed. Amber stood beside Albert, offering silent support. He glanced at her, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself a small, weary smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. Amber nodded. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here for you always." Albert kicked out Sharon from his house. The days after the confrontation were a blur of shame and regret for Sharon. She moved from one cheap motel to another, her once stable life reduced to a suitcase and a series of bad decisions. She had tried reaching out to her parents, hoping they might offer some support, but the conversation had been painfully short. Sharon's mother, voice heavy with disappointment, had made it clear, "You've embarrassed us, Sharon. I don't even know who you are anymore." Her father had simply hung up, leaving Sharon with nothing but a dial tone and a sinking feeling of abandonment. Sharon stared at her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Friends she thought would support her had stopped answering her calls. Even the ones who didn't know the full extent of what had happened were keeping their distance, uncomfortable with the gossip that had spread like wildfire. The only person she could think of was Blake, the man she had risked everything for. Sharon hesitated, then dialed his number, her heart pounding as the phone rang. After several rings, Blake's voice finally crackled through the line, sounding distant and irritated. "What do you want, bitch?" Blake answered flatly, his tone devoid of any warmth. Sharon's voice cracked as she spoke. "Blake, I need you. I have nothing now. No one's talking to me, and Albert won't let me see Sally. I'm completely alone." Her words came out in a rush, desperation lacing every syllable. Blake sighed heavily, his frustration evident. "Sharon, I told you I can't deal with this right now. It's too much. I've got my own problems to handle." Sharon clenched the phone tighter, her anger and sadness bubbling up. "You said you'd be there for me. You promised me, Blake. I left everything for you, and now you're just walking away?" Blake's voice turned cold, his patience wearing thin. "I didn't sign up for this mess, Sharon. You think I wanted everyone to find out? I'm dealing with my own fallout, my job, my reputation. Everything's on the line because of this." Sharon's breath hitched as she listened. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My home, my daughter, my family. You're all I have left, Blake." Blake's silence on the other end felt like a final, crushing blow. "I can't help you," he said eventually, his voice emotionless. "You're on your own." The line went dead, and Sharon stared at her phone, her last lifeline severed. Sharon spent the next few days trying to piece her life back together, but every door she knocked on was slammed shut. She went to her parents' house, hoping they might take her in, but her father answered the door with a hard look in his eyes. "You made your bed," he said curtly. "Now lie in it." He shut the door without another word, leaving Sharon standing on the porch, fighting back tears. She reached out to a few old friends, but the responses were the same. Polite but distant, excuses about being busy, subtle hints that they didn't want to be involved in her drama. Sharon felt the walls closing in, the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her more heavily than ever. One afternoon, she decided to drive by the house she once called home, just to catch a glimpse of Sally. She parked a block away, watching from a distance as Albert and Amber played with Sally in the front yard. They looked happy like a family. Sally's laughter echoed faintly, a sound that once filled Sharon's days, but now only reminded her of what she had lost. Sharon stayed in her car, feeling the sting of her exclusion. She wanted to run to Sally, to hold her and apologize, but she knew it was futile. Albert had made it clear Sharon wasn't welcome. Not now, maybe not ever. She tried calling Albert again, but every call went straight to voicemail. She left messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Please, Albert," she pleaded into the phone. "Just let me see her. I made a mistake, but I'm still her mother. Don't do this." But Albert never called back. He didn't respond to texts. He was done, and Sharon knew it. She was left with the bitter reality that her daughter was now living in a home that no longer included her. Amber had stepped into the role Sharon had vacated, and Sharon could see the bond forming between them, a bond that used to be hers. One evening, Sharon tried to find solace in the familiar, the local cafe where she used to meet her friends. She sat at the corner table, nursing a cup of coffee, hoping for a familiar face, someone who might show her a shred of kindness. But when she spotted one of her old friends, they glanced at her, whispered something to their companion, and turned away, pretending not to see her. Sharon's grip tightened around her cup, humiliation burning in her chest. She was the pariah now, the woman whose name was whispered in disgust, whose story was told as a cautionary tale. That night, back in her motel room, Sharon finally let the tears come. She cried for her daughter, for the life she'd thrown away, and for the man she had trusted, who had left her when she needed him most. She cried until there were no tears left, only the cold, empty realization that she had no one to blame but herself. She picked up her phone one last time, scrolling through old pictures of Sally. The happy moments felt like a lifetime ago. Sharon's fingers hovered over the screen, but she didn't have anyone left to call. Blake was gone, her friends were gone, and Albert had built a new life without her. Sharon knew she had hit rock bottom. The fallout from her choices was complete, and there was no going back. She was left with nothing but her own guilt, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had cost her everything. And as she lay down on the stiff motel bed, staring up at the ceiling, Sharon understood that this was her new reality, a lonely, painful existence defined by the choices she could never undo. Albert sat on the porch, watching Sally play in the yard. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the house, and for the first time in a long while, Albert felt a sense of peace. Amber joined him, handing him a glass of iced tea. She sat down beside him, their shoulders brushing. It was a simple touch, but it meant everything. "I never wanted to come between you two," Amber said softly, looking at Sally, who was chasing butterflies. "I never wanted this to happen like it did." Albert glanced at her, his expression gentle. "You didn't, Amber. None of this is on you. Sharon made her choices. You've been here for me and for Sally, and that's all that matters." Amber nodded, but the guilt still lingered in her eyes. She had been Sharon's best friend for years, and stepping into this new role felt both right and wrong. She hadn't planned on falling for Albert, but in the aftermath of Sharon's betrayal, they had found comfort in each other. Slowly, that comfort had turned into something deeper. Albert set his glass down and took Amber's hand. "This is the life I was meant to have," he said, looking at her with a calm certainty. "You, me, and Sally. I've never been happier." Amber squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and relief. They had been through so much, and finally, it felt like the storm had passed. Meanwhile, Sharon's life continued to unravel. She was a ghost in her own world, haunting places she once belonged but could no longer enter. She watched from a distance as Albert and Amber built their new life together. It was a cruel irony that the one person Sharon had trusted most was now the woman raising her daughter. Sharon tried to approach Sally once, hoping for a brief moment of connection. She waited near the school playground, her heart pounding as she watched Sally play. When the bell rang, Sally ran toward Albert and Amber, her face lighting up as she threw her arms around them. Sharon took a hesitant step forward, but she stopped when she saw the happiness on Sally's face. It was a happiness that Sharon knew she could no longer be part of. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't the life she had imagined, reduced to sneaking glances and living in the shadows. She had lost everything she had taken for granted, and now she was nothing more than an unwelcome spectator. At home, Albert and Amber continued to grow closer. They spent evenings cooking dinner together, making simple meals that filled the house with warmth. Albert would tell jokes, and Amber would laugh, the kind of laughter that had been missing for so long. Sally would join in, giggling at the playful banter between the two adults she now called family. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Sally looked up with a curious smile. Are you and Amber going to get married, Dad? Amber's face flushed, and she glanced at Albert, unsure of what to say. But Albert just smiled, reaching out to tousle Sally's hair. Would you like that? He asked, glancing at Amber with a soft look. Sally nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, then Amber can be my real mom. Amber's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned over to hug Sally. I'm already your real mom, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I'd love to be your official one too. Albert reached for Amber's hand across the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Then let's make it official, he said simply. They exchanged smiles, a silent agreement that they were ready to take the next step. The wedding was small, intimate, just close family and friends. As Albert and Amber exchanged vows, there was no trace of the past, only hope for the future. Albert looked at Amber, his heart full, knowing that this was where he was meant to be. I promise to be there for you and Sally, no matter what, Amber said during her vows, her voice trembling with sincerity. To love you both, to protect you, and to be the family you deserve. Albert smiled, pulling her close for a kiss. And I promise to love you, Amber. You've shown me what a real partner looks like, and I'm grateful every day that you're in our lives. Sharon watched from a distance, hidden in the back of the small venue. She hadn't been invited, but she couldn't resist witnessing the moment that officially marked the end of her old life. She stood alone, her heart heavy as she watched Albert smile at Amber the way he used to smile at her. As the ceremony ended, Sharon slipped away, unnoticed and unmissed. She walked to her car, wiping tears from her cheeks. Albert and Amber had moved on, creating a life she could never be part of again. Albert, Amber, and Sally continued to thrive, their lives filled with laughter and love. They were a family, and for the first time, Albert felt truly whole. As he sat in their living room, watching Amber and Sally play a board game, Albert knew he had found his home. Sharon, left to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence, could only watch from the sidelines, knowing she had lost the life that Albert and Amber were now living. For Albert, the future was bright. For Sharon, it was just another day of watching the life she had destroyed move on without her. Sharon sat alone in a dimly lit, run-down motel room, her once vibrant life reduced to the stale smell of cigarettes and cheap liquor. She stared at the peeling wallpaper, her mind drifting to the days when her home was filled with the sound of Sally's laughter and Albert's comforting presence. Now, all she had were fragmented memories and a photo of Sally she kept tucked in her wallet. It was creased and faded from the many times she had unfolded it, a painful reminder of what she had lost. Sharon had been moving from place to place, each more depressing than the last. She had tried finding work, but her reputation preceded her, and doors that once swung open now remained firmly shut. The whispers followed her everywhere, a cautionary tale of infidelity and downfall that had spread through town. Employers saw her as unreliable, and old friends no longer returned her calls. Late at night, Sharon often found herself scrolling through Albert's social media, torturing herself with glimpses of the life she could no longer be part of. She saw pictures of Albert and Amber smiling, Sally between them, beaming at the camera. They looked happy, like a real family. And that's exactly what they were now. Albert had moved on, and Sally had a new mother figure who cared for her in ways Sharon no longer could. Sharon's days were spent in regret, and her nights in sleepless torment. She tried to numb the pain with alcohol, but it only brought more self-loathing. On particularly dark nights, she would dial Albert's number just to hear his voicemail greeting. She never left a message. She didn't have the courage. Meanwhile, Albert and Amber's relationship blossomed. They had turned the house into a warm, loving home, filled with joy and the little moments that Sharon had taken for granted. Amber's kindness and nurturing spirit helped Sally adjust to the new normal, and soon, Sally began calling Amber Mom without hesitation. Albert watched their bond grow, grateful that Sally had found someone who would always put her first. One afternoon, Amber sat with Albert at the kitchen table, going through Sally's school project, a scrapbook of her favorite moments. Among the photos of playdates and family dinners, there was a recent picture of the three of them, smiling at the zoo. Albert flipped the page, pausing at an old photo of Sharon holding Sally as a baby. Do you think she misses her? Amber asked gently, sensing Albert's unease. Albert sighed, staring at the image. I'm sure she does. But Sharon made her choices. She put herself first, and now she's paying the price. Amber nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind his words. Sally's happy now, Albert. You've done an incredible job. Albert squeezed her hand, grateful for her unwavering support. I couldn't have done it without you, Amber. You've given us both a second chance. One evening, Sharon sat on the edge of her motel bed, clutching the photo of Sally. Tears streamed down her face as she traced her daughter's smiling face with her finger. She had tried to rebuild, to find some semblance of a normal life, but every attempt was met with the same outcome: failure. She was stuck in a cycle of regret, unable to escape the consequences of her actions. Sharon whispered to herself, her voice breaking. I made one mistake and I lost everything. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and she realized she had no one to blame but herself. She had chased a fleeting thrill and sacrificed the most important people in her life. She threw the photo onto the bed, unable to look at it any longer. The image of Sally was too much to bear, a constant reminder of the life she had thrown away. Sharon lay back on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, feeling the crushing loneliness settle in. Albert's voice echoed softly in his thoughts as he reflected on Sharon's downfall. She thought she could have it all, he mused quietly, watching Sally and Amber play in the yard from the kitchen window. But all she has now are the memories of what she destroyed. Sharon's life had become a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. She had once believed she could have the best of both worlds, but in the end, her choices left her with nothing but emptiness. As Albert looked at his new family, he knew that he and Amber had built something beautiful from the wreckage Sharon had left behind. For Albert and Amber, the future was filled with hope. For Sharon, all that remained were regrets and the bitter knowledge that she had lost the only things that ever truly mattered.